Morning. Thanks for everybody who has served here, which is pretty much everyone. Since we've been here, honestly, everyone here has done at least something to help further the church, to further the kingdom. And you are appreciated. The singing today has been terrific. Thank you, Aaron. The singing is always great. So I want to thank Wayman also, and Jack and Dan. That's not for everybody, but thank goodness we have you guys to help with the singing. But you are appreciated, and it takes the entire congregation to get things right. So thank you. Next Sunday, just as a reminder, it's the Bring a Friend Day. Make sure you have the right date, and also your clocks move back 1 hour. So if you're here at 10:30 and no one's here, it's because it's 9:30. Get it? All right. What else? Judy Carroll. Judy, is it your birthday today? Happy birthday, Judy. I was going to try to get a Paul Anka song for you, but that's not really appropriate, is it? So, but happy birthday, and I just hope and pray that you have a wonderful, wonderful day. When less is more, that's today's lesson. We're going to talk about Mark chapter 9, verses 42 through 50. I want to start with a question. When you think of a bully, when you think of bullies, who comes to mind? You don't have to answer that. I'm sure someone in your mind is coming to the forefront right now. I think of, if you're familiar with the Back to the Future movies, and I know there's 80s kids in here. What about Biff? Remember Biff? Biff was like the ultimate bully. In the movie Mean Girls, not that I've seen it, from what I understand, the girls in that movie are really big bullies. And Aaron, this is for you. Where's Aaron? The Broad Street Bullies. Remember in hockey? The Philadelphia Flyers of the 70s. They won some games, but they were really known for just beating the snot out of the other team. Hence, the Broad Street Bullies. So we think of big, tough men or women who are just really mean, and those are the bullies. You know who I think of? I think of Lucy Van Pelt, better known as Linus' sister. Why is Lucy a bully? Every time, we all know the answer to this, every time Charlie Brown lines up to kick the football, what does Lucy do? At the very last second, every single time. So part of me is saying, Charlie Brown, don't you know better by now? And also, Lucy, don't you know better by now? But that, inevitably, Charlie Brown will do that, he'll miss, he'll fall and hurt himself. And everybody gets a laugh, ha ha ha. But then again, that's the world of peanuts. It's not the real world. And I am not making light of bullying. I understand it's a problem, I understand it exists, and it comes in many different forms. Some are very obvious, some are not so obvious, they're more subtle. When we talk about being stumbling blocks for people in their faith, that is a subtle or possibly obvious form of bullying. So I pray, don't be Lucy. Don't be Biff. Don't cause others to stumble, especially the little ones that Jesus talks about. How do we treat the least of God's people? That says a whole lot about you. It doesn't say anything about them. It says a lot about you, about me, about us. So you're either going to be a stumbling block or you will be salt. And we're going to talk a little bit about both during today's text. You're going to choose one. You're not going to be both, and you're not going to be neither. You're either getting in someone's way or helping them out. So today's text. Before we start reading, the previous 9 verses, 33 through 41, Jesus talks about judging the motives of other people. Remember, John, we talked last week about the us against them, and the Apostle John was irate because some of the other people were casting out demons in your name, and wow, they're not us, they're not part of the popular group. They're not part of the core group, so we shouldn't give them any attention. Well, that's not true. And Jesus let them have it about that. This is what's known, by the way, as a red letter sermon. Do you know what a red letter sermon is? Every single word in today's text is said by Jesus. We'll start with the first two verses, 42 and 43. If anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them if a large millstone were hung around their neck and they were thrown into the sea. If your hand causes you to stumble, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life maimed than with two hands to go into hell, where the fire never goes out. So, Matt, you're saying we need to go home and cut off our hands? Please don't do that. Little one, who are the little ones? Is it as simple as saying, well, they're the kids. It's the little ones in our church. It's the children. Could be. Maybe new believers. Definitely could be a new believer, could be known as a little one, little in our faith, young in our faith. How about ones who are maybe struggling with their belief, backsliding in a way? Yeah, I think these could be known as the least of these, little ones. Weren't we a little one at one point in our life? Some of us might be struggling right now. These are the ones who you look at, they don't seem that important, so therefore they don't have a place in the kingdom. But Jesus' economy does not work that way, does it? And by the way, I should mention, later on in chapter 10, verse 24, Jesus refers to his own disciples as children. Just an FYI. More importantly, when we talk about stumbling, I don't know, maybe someone who's kind of clumsy and a klutz who's always tripping over his own or her own feet come to mind when we're talking about stumbling. More importantly, the description I would give you is it's when you fall into sin, when you fall into waywardness. And in verse 42, we see Jesus, the Son of God, discussing the consequences of causing others to sin or to lose faith. That's not ideal, is it? And then he transitions quickly to causing yourself to sin. Bottom line is, whoever the little one is, do not cause him or her to stumble. This will not end well for you or for them. Think about it. If you're a parent, maybe your kids are grown up, but if you're a parent of young kids, isn't there always that one boy or girl who when they're hanging around your kid, you're saying, hey, watch out for that guy. Or when they come knocking on the door, you say, all right, gotta have your third eye on him the whole time. Because you don't want someone, how would you feel if someone else led your child astray? Now, ultimately, yes, we have to teach our kids to be responsible. I understand that. But there's always that one boy or girl who's up to no good, and you just got to be careful. You wouldn't want your child hanging around them too much. Another example would be, let's say you're out to dinner. It's just you and your friend happens to be an alcoholic, and you maybe can handle drinks. But at times, if you're out with him or her, you won't drink that night. Why? Because you feel sorry for him? Not necessarily. Because you know it's just not worth it. Because that one drink might cause the other person to drink, might cause the other person to stumble. Again, that's on him. But you don't want to put someone in the position where they will fail. Jesus strictly forbids that. So what's the deal with this millstone? Do we see millstones a lot today? No, we don't. It is what it is. You see what it is. It's a big circular object used to flatten grain, and more importantly, it's a heavy and inescapable responsibility. And that is a pretty big description for someone who is going to cause someone else to stumble. We see this in Judges, by the way, chapter 9, verse 53. Remember Abimelech, Gideon's son? What happens to him? He approaches the entrance to a tower to set it on fire. And one of the women drops an upper millstone on his head and cracks it. That kills him. We also see it referred to in Revelation 18:21, describing the overthrow of evil Babylon. And then verse 43 starts what we call a hyperbole. You're not going to cut off hands today. I hope. Don't cut off feet. Don't get your eye out of its socket. However, The power of visual metaphors was very important 2,000 years ago. Do you know why? They weren't reading and writing like we do today. This was a largely illiterate society. And so it seems silly to hear words like this. But look, don't get caught up in that, please. Don't miss the point, because you don't want to ignore the message behind the words. It's about the theme more than it is the translation, I would argue. So that's those first two verses. Let's take a look at the next 5, 44 through 48. And if your foot causes you to stumble, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life crippled than to have 2 feet and be thrown into hell. And if your eye causes you to stumble, pluck it out. It is better for you to enter the kingdom of God with 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and be thrown into hell, where the worms that eat them do not die, and the fire is not quenched. All right, I said 44 through 48. You probably notice, and if you're holding a Bible right now, you'll see it too. There is no 44, and there is no 46. It's kind of strange. Most manuscripts just go from 43 to 45 to 47. That's just by way of background. I gotta be honest, when I first started reading the Bible, I first started coming around, this was so hard for me to read because I was taking it literally. I mean, I didn't go through on it. I remember thinking, if being a Christian requires me to cut off limbs, gee, I don't know, is it worth it? I mean, I'm like going online, is it painful to cut off a finger? And like, well, obviously I was missing the message at that particular point. I'll tell you what, something clearly sets Jesus off here, because 4 times in today's text, he uses the word stumble. Again, how do you treat the least of God's people? So yes, take these comments seriously, just not literally. The truth lies somewhere between the actual statement, and I would argue more of the underlying proposition. Okay, so don't get caught up in the words. They're just here to highlight offenses. But I will say this: hand, foot, eye, whatever, if it's causing you to stumble, you've got to get rid of it. Anything it takes. Anything that impedes our spiritual walk, we got to cut ties with. Anything you put in front of your relationship with Jesus Christ, you know what's going to happen? You're going to lose it anyway. I like to call it the nouns in our life, the people, the places, the things. There are just some of them that we've got to get rid of. Now, when I say get rid of people, I don't mean literally. Don't put hits on anyone. That's not what I'm saying. There are some people, especially if we're struggling, if we're new in our faith, we just can't be around them. You don't mean to sound cruel. You still love them. You still pray for them. There are just some people, and you know who's coming to mind. Someone's got to be coming to mind that you just cannot be around. No explanation necessary. There are some places, I'll go back to the alcoholic example again. If you're recovering from alcoholism, are you going to spend time in a bar? Probably not. You could go and not drink, but why make that mistake? Why take that risk? And there are just certain things that you're going to need to get rid of. If you're struggling with internet pornography, for example, maybe you need to get rid of that laptop for now. And a lot of this is dependent on how mature you are in your faith. I love the very first verse of the Psalter, Psalm 1, verse 1. I know this is one of Juana's favorites. Blessed is he who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord and will meditate on it day and night. Paul says something great about this too. Romans 14, 1 through 4. He says, accept the one whose faith is weak, without quarreling over disputable matters. One person's faith allows them to eat anything, but another whose faith is weak eats only vegetables. Ugh. The one who eats everything must not treat with contempt the one who does not. And the one who does not eat everything must not judge the one who does, for God has accepted them. Who are you to judge someone else's servant? To their own master, servants stand or fall, and they will stand, for the Lord is able to make them stand. You really do need to ask yourself the question, what do I really need to cut off from my life in order to further my relationship with the King of Kings? Who do I have to get rid of in order, or what do I need to get rid of to separate myself from, to be a better disciple and make disciples of others? Our authority at work, our authority at home, our authority in the gym, I guess, is not nearly as important as the authority that we submit to, which comes courtesy of Jesus Christ. That's who we submit to. So we have to do everything it takes to keep ourselves from tripping up. The opposite of this is focusing on service, on compassion, on humility, on kindness, on love. We are so, right around now, actually, yeah, probably about a year ago, this weekend, there was this little election going on. Do you remember? Yeah. Please tell me I don't need to refresh your memory. And by the way, it's not just a presidential election. Anytime there's an election of any kind, you always see what on TV? These ridiculous negative commercials, right? Because, let's point out the skeletons in my opponent's closet. Oh, really? So you don't have any skeletons in your closet, right? And look, it's funny because none of us are running for office, except for Phil, at the moment, so we can kind of laugh about this. But you know, we focus on everyone else's flaws because it's easy to do so. So it's almost like we're saying as Christians, hey, let's debate with other Christians about what's wrong with them rather than deal with our own issues. Let's major in the minors. What is more important to you? What is more importantly, to God? Not about you. It's about pleasing Him. And as you can see on the bottom there, God has very sharp words. If you are focused on pointing out the flaws in others, that's taken from Isaiah 66, verse 24. The worms that eat them do not die, and the fire is not quenched. Is that literal? Well, Isaiah uses hell kind of as a graphic illustration. It's a strict admonition, if you will. Isaiah speaks of fiery judgment. You say, okay, I don't understand. And then David, in the 21st Psalm, uses it more of kind of illustrative more than anything else. However, Jesus, he's clearly pointing out two alternatives here. You do realize this, right? This unquenchable fire, he's not joking about this. That is very real. And it's interesting, by the way, that Jesus speaks often about hell to believers and about heaven to those who don't believe. Don't we need to follow that example? When you speak the gospel, and I don't mean stand up here and preach, when you talk to someone about your faith, when you explain the gospel to someone, are you only including, hey, salvation? Or is there bad news as well? What's the opposite of that? You can't offer someone good news if they don't understand what the bad news is, right? You have to speak of both forgiveness and condemnation. You say, well, that's pretty harsh. I say, yeah, it is. But Mark's gospel is not for the faint of heart, is it? There's no universalism where everybody wins in the end, right? You're all winners. Here's a participation trophy. That is not how it works. And I've said this before. Heaven is just not the default destination. We do not all win in the end. And let me tell you, there is no second chance. You don't get a do-over once you die. You know the statistics. Do I have to repeat it? 1 out of every 1 person will die. Crazy, right? Let's not complicate the simplicity of salvation. 49:50 talks about the salt of the earth. Everyone will be salted with fire. Salt is good. But if it loses its saltiness, how can you make it salty again? Have salt among yourselves and be at peace with each other. So there's fire, and then there's salt. We take salt for granted because it's so plentiful. But a little pinch of salt can do quite a bit. Fire, though, you see the word fire here. What is it pointing to? Well, Mark's audience, remember how badly persecuted they're being. They're the ones initially reading this. Christians being persecuted in Rome. And we're going to be tested this way too. According to 1 Corinthians 3:13, our work will be revealed with fire. And fire will also test the quality of our work. But what about salt? In Leviticus 2:13, when Moses speaks of the sacrifices in Israel, we are to be like this salt that is already added to those Old Testament sacrifices, making it so much more potent. And that's what we are asked to be. That's the good news. The bad news is if you're an enemy of God, and this isn't me saying it, it's Jesus himself, there's something called the fire of destruction. That is not where you want to end up. Very similar, by the way, to the Sermon on the Mount, is it not? Salt of the earth, the light of the earth, absolutely. And when you are at peace, when you're at peace with others, you're not putting stumbling blocks, back to my original point, in their path. Now, Jesus used these words 2,000 years ago. And maybe you're saying, yeah, this is an old book. The Bible is just not for me. And it's King James, it's hard to understand. And, the disciples back then, they were different than us, right? So what he says to Matthew and John and James, what he says even to Judas, that doesn't mean anything to us, right? Because it was 2,000 years ago. Wrong. Dead wrong. What he says to them means even more to us today. You see, this Bible, it's not stale. It doesn't lose significance just because you've opened it a few times. If anything, it gains more significance through the years. So how do we season one another with salt? First, try that again. First, we use words of peace. When was the last time you had told someone, I love you? And I don't mean your dog, your cat, or your significant other, or your kids. That's easy. Anybody can do that. Go up to someone, I love you. Seems easy enough, right? How about words of encouragement? Isaiah 40:31. Those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not become faint. Words of encouragement. What about words of wisdom? Biblical truth. Some people just need a refresher. These are the rudiments of the Christian faith. That's why it's so important to study together, or at least to ask someone questions. If you are struggling, teach me, what am I missing? It's easy for someone else to figure things out about you sometimes, and it is for you to figure things out on your own, right? But your words and your actions, they have to lead someone towards service to Christ. And if not, that is a major problem. Not for God, because he's going to figure things out anyway. That's a problem for you. It's easy to criticize. It's really easy to criticize. But be careful, especially if you're criticizing children of God. Don't focus so much. Don't focus solely on pointing out the flaws of other when you don't deal with that big log in your own eye. It's like, I think it was a comic I saw where this father was screaming at his son, control your anger. Get it? Steve Martin once said, before you criticize a man, walk a mile in his shoes. That way, when you do criticize him, you'll be a mile away, and you'll have his shoes. You do have a great responsibility. And this is so much more than what the words say, and I don't have enough time to get into all this. You help the weaker Christian as much as you can. And by weaker, I don't mean someone who doesn't know as much Bible as you, or hasn't come to church as much as you, or is maybe younger in their faith. Just someone who is struggling, the little ones, maybe even the children. It takes sacrifice, but it's an incredible opportunity. It requires a change in our own attitude. When you work with someone else, you can't help but feel better about yourself, right? When you search for the good in others, you find the best of yourself. It's a simple formula. And it's something that requires looking at the sin in your own heart. And only a pinch is needed. We are incredibly quick to criticize. We pigeonhole. Every liberal thinks the Republicans are gun-toting religious nuts. Every conservative thinks liberals are bleeding heart people who don't care about religion. Every Muslim's going to kill us. Every American's ugly. You know what I mean? And we're all guilty of it in some way. we don't know what's best for the other person. There is no salt whatsoever in making sweeping generalizations. How much different would our rhetoric be if we use salt instead of fire? And there's an incredible amount of potency in using encouragement. Colossians 4:6, let your conversation be always full of what? Grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. That's a positive example. And James, James, can't talk about James enough. James 3:6, the tongue is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. Wow, it corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. What? The tongue? What? It's insane, right? And Paul, I don't know if you can see that, he started his epistles, grace and peace. He didn't get right into the constructive criticism part, did he? Which leads me to my last point on this slide. Constructive criticism is excellent, and it is an incredibly helpful tool. Criticism to criticize and make it personal, that's completely different. You can be honest with one another without being pejorative toward them, without giving them derogatory statements. There's a way to do it. Use salt. And sometimes it is as simple as we've just got to lose something in order to gain in our walk. Someone, unfortunately, had to take this seriously. Literally, I should say. Everybody know who that is? All right. April 26th, 2003. It's a man by the name of Aron Ralston. I believe there was a movie made called 127 Hours. He went climbing in a canyon. It was called Blue John Canyon in southeastern Utah. It was supposed to last one day. He went by himself, no problem. Only there was a big problem. When he was climbing, Ralston, he kind of stuck. He pushed his right arm into a crack in the canyon wall. And then an 800-pound boulder came down and pinned his arm. Not an 8-pound boulder, not an 80-pound, an 800-pound boulder. So, you think panic might have been part of the equation there? And he's by himself. He's desperate. He takes out his pocket knife. He's trying to chip away at it. That didn't do anything. He tries to rig a makeshift pulley with ropes just to lift the boulder, all with one hand, by the way. No success there. 3 days later, he's still sitting there. He's running out of water. He's running out of food. He's running out of sanity. And quite honestly, he's running out of options. So he decided, I'm going to have to sacrifice something if I'm going to survive. So what did he sacrifice? His arm. He bends his body, he somehow breaks his wrist bone, and then he uses that little knife to amputate his right arm below the elbow. Can you imagine that? Somehow he remained conscious through this. He made a tourniquet, and then he rappelled 60 feet to the canyon floor. I'm not sure how I handled it, Ralston would say later. I felt pain, that's an understatement. I felt pain, and I coped with it, and I moved on. Whew, that's simple. Well, here's Ralston today. He had a will to live, and he did whatever it took to stay alive. Amazing. That is what Christ calls us to do in our relationship with Him. He wants us to get rid of whatever is necessary to keep from being tripped up and stuck in our own life. Because when we don't get rid of things we need to get rid of, we give ourselves the glory and not God. What are you going to give up this week? It doesn't have to be, well, please don't make it be an arm unless you need to. It doesn't have to be anything dramatic. It could be sacrificing a few hours online one day. It could be putting away that cell phone that you've been on for 13 hours. What can you... Hi, Charlotte. What can you put away this week? Hey, we're on live TV, right? These things happen. If you've not been baptized, now would be a great day to take that leap, because you're giving up so many things to gain so much more. So if you have questions about that, if there's something you need to get off your chest, now is a great time to do so. You come talk to me or any of the other men or women in this congregation. Right now, we will stand and